Elon Musk was no stranger to high-stakes moments. As the CEO of both SpaceX and Tesla, he often found himself navigating the thin line between innovation and failure. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the encounter that was about to alter his perception of genius, and perhaps even the course of his life. It was a quiet Tuesday morning at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Elon had just wrapped up a meeting with his engineering team about the upcoming Mars mission. They were making progress, but the road ahead was still full of challenges. SpaceX had become a symbol of possibility, a company that dared to dream big and push beyond the boundaries of what was thought possible. But even Musk, who had defied the odds time and time again, could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Just another day at the office, he muttered under his breath, staring out of his office window toward the rocket that stood tall against the blue sky. The engineers were working on a new launch design, and Elon had his hands full with the usual pressure of making sure everything went according to plan. But then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant, Rachel. "Mr. Musk, we have a visitor. A young boy, 12 years old, IQ of 162. He's requesting a meeting. His parents are in town. They say he has some ideas that might interest you." Elon's brow furrowed. An IQ of 162? That was off the charts. But the idea of meeting with a 12-year-old, no matter how gifted, seemed like an odd request. Still, he was no stranger to unconventional opportunities. After all, he built a multi-billion-dollar empire on the back of thinking outside the box. "Send him in," Elon replied, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism in his voice. Moments later, the door to his office opened, and in walked the boy. He was small for his age, but his eyes were intense, sharp, almost too focused for someone so young. Ethan, the boy's name, walked with confidence, not the awkwardness most kids his age would display in such a high-profile setting. "Mr. Musk," Ethan said, his voice steady, "it's an honor to meet you." Elon studied him closely. There was no hesitation in Ethan's words, no sign of nervousness. He was speaking to Elon as if they were old friends, as though the idea of meeting one of the most influential figures in the world wasn't a big deal. "Nice to meet you, Ethan," Elon said, gesturing for the boy to sit down. He wasn't sure what to expect. He had met brilliant minds before, but they were adults, seasoned professionals with years of experience under their belts. This kid, on the other hand, was a whole new puzzle. "I've been following your work for a while," Ethan continued, not waiting for Elon to ask. "SpaceX, Tesla, the Hyperloop, you're doing amazing things. But I think there's something missing. Something you haven't quite figured out yet." Elon raised an eyebrow. This was interesting. "And what's that?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, intrigued. Ethan didn't hesitate. "You're thinking too small. You've been focused on getting to Mars, on electric cars, and on colonizing space. But what if you could change the way humanity travels, not just on Earth, but across the entire solar system? You've got rockets, but what if you could build a way to travel between planets at faster-than-light speeds?" Elon was taken aback. Faster-than-light travel? This kid was talking about things that most physicists only dreamed of. He was used to hearing big ideas, but this was different. There was a raw brilliance to Ethan's words, something that made Elon feel both excited and unsettled. "Faster than light, huh?" Elon said, his voice trailing off as he considered the possibility. "You know that goes against the current understanding of physics, right?" "I know," Ethan replied calmly. "But what if we're just missing something? What if the laws of physics aren't as rigid as we think? Maybe there's a way to bend them, manipulate them. You've already done the impossible with rockets. Why stop there?" Elon could hardly believe what he was hearing. A 12-year-old boy, not only discussing quantum physics and space travel but proposing ideas that seemed to stretch the very limits of human understanding. But what struck Elon the most was Ethan's confidence. There was no fear in the boy's voice, no uncertainty. Ethan wasn't just talking like a child. He was talking like someone who had already envisioned the future. For a moment, the room fell silent. Elon felt a surge of excitement, mixed with a sense of unease. He had always prided himself on being a visionary, on seeing things that others didn't. But now, in front of him, was someone who was challenging everything he thought he knew. "All right, Ethan," Elon said, breaking the silence. "You've got my attention. Tell me more." Ethan smiled slightly, as if he had been expecting this moment. He leaned forward, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "I've been working on some calculations," Ethan said. "It's not about faster-than-light travel in the traditional sense. It's about creating a warp field, a bubble in space-time that could allow a ship to travel at immense speeds without breaking the laws of physics. It's theoretical, but I think it could work." Elon felt a spark of recognition. What Ethan was proposing was far beyond conventional science. But in that moment, Elon realized that this boy wasn't just another genius child. He was someone who might change the world in ways no one had even dreamed of. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon thought to himself, his mind racing. This encounter, this moment, could be the start of something truly extraordinary. Ethan sat in Elon Musk's office, a quiet confidence radiating from him, as though he belonged there. To anyone else, the sight of a 12-year-old in such an iconic place might have seemed out of place. But to Elon, it felt oddly natural. The kid wasn't just speaking about advanced theories, he was living them, his words not just ideas, but part of his DNA. Elon leaned back in his chair, still processing what Ethan had just said. Faster-than-light travel. A warp field. It sounded like science fiction, but for some reason, Elon didn't dismiss it the way he might have a year ago. There was something about the way Ethan spoke, about how this kid wasn't rattled by the enormity of the conversation, that made Elon want to listen more closely. As Ethan launched into a detailed explanation of his theory, Elon couldn't help but think back to his own childhood. He remembered reading through physics books, devouring every idea about space, rockets, and electric cars that he could find. Even then, he had known there was something more, something just beyond the horizon of possibility. But those early dreams had been different. They were born from a hunger to prove that the impossible was possible. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't seem to be trying to prove anything. He simply knew it was possible. Elon was jolted from his thoughts as Ethan paused, looking at him, waiting for a response. "Do you think it's possible?" Ethan asked, his voice surprisingly mature for a boy of his age. Elon blinked. "You're asking me if something I've never even considered could work? You're asking if a 12-year-old could figure out how to travel faster than light?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't see why not. Most of the great scientific breakthroughs didn't come from people who followed the rules. They came from people who dared to question them." Elon smiled, feeling both challenged and oddly inspired. Daring to question the rules. That was exactly how he'd built his career, first with PayPal, then Tesla, and finally SpaceX. He had become a disruptor, pushing against norms, refusing to accept that the world couldn't change. Ethan was no different. He was a child of the same kind of radical thinking. "I have to ask," Elon said, leaning forward slightly, "how did you get into all of this? The math, the science? Most kids your age are playing video games, or worrying about grades. What made you decide to go down this path?" Ethan's expression softened. "It started when I was really young. I was about 5 when I first started reading. But not just normal books, things like Einstein's theory of relativity or the fabric of the cosmos. I didn't really understand them at first, but I liked how they made me think differently. By the time I was 8, I could solve complex calculus problems, and by 9, I was reading books on quantum mechanics." Elon's eyebrows shot up. Quantum mechanics at 9? That wasn't just impressive. It was unsettling. "What about your parents? What do they think about all of this?" Elon asked, trying to get a sense of Ethan's world beyond the numbers and theories. "They've always tried to support me," Ethan said. "But sometimes, I think they're worried. I don't fit in with other kids. I don't know how to talk to them. I can't play sports, and I don't really understand why they think certain things are fun. I've always been different. They don't always know how to keep up with me." Elon paused, looking at Ethan. For the first time, he saw the fragility that lurked beneath the surface of the boy's genius. Ethan was, in many ways, the same as he was, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to change the world. But in his own way, Ethan had also been isolated by that very brilliance. While Elon had always had an innate confidence in himself, this young genius seemed burdened by the weight of his own mind. "I get it," Elon said softly. "I know what it's like to feel like you're not like everyone else. Growing up, I didn't always fit in either. But I found a way to channel that difference into something powerful. You can do the same." Ethan's eyes brightened. "I want to, but it's hard. I feel like no one understands what I'm trying to do. Everyone just tells me I'm too young, or that I should focus on being a kid." He paused, then added, "You know what that feels like, right?" Elon nodded slowly. He had heard those words more times than he cared to remember. "When I was your age, people told me I was crazy for wanting to start a company like Tesla or SpaceX. But I didn't let it stop me. And you shouldn't either." Ethan gave a small smile, the first real smile Elon had seen from him. "Thanks." The conversation shifted back to the science. Ethan's warp field theory, the potential of bending space-time to allow for faster-than-light travel, and how it might change everything. Elon was completely captivated now. What Ethan was proposing wasn't just theoretical. It was a completely new way of thinking about the universe. The ideas rolled off Ethan's tongue like he had been mulling them over for years, but it was clear this was only the beginning for him. He had more plans, more questions. Elon felt as if he were talking to a peer rather than a child, someone who saw the world with a unique lens that could push humanity forward. As the conversation came to an end, Elon found himself standing in front of Ethan, shaking his hand. "I think you're onto something, Ethan. I don't know how we're going to get there, but I'm willing to help you try." Ethan's face lit up with excitement. "You mean it?" Elon grinned. "I mean it. You're not just some child with an idea. You're a force to be reckoned with, and I want to see where that takes us." As Ethan left SpaceX headquarters, Elon couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and unease. What had just happened? He had met many brilliant people in his life, but this child, this genius, felt different. There was something about Ethan that made Elon question everything he thought he knew about intelligence, about science, and about the future. Ethan's presence had ignited something inside him, an idea, a possibility that could change the course of history. And whether he liked it or not, Elon knew that the world was about to get a whole lot more interesting. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind for both Elon and Ethan. What began as a casual meeting soon spiraled into something much larger, a collaboration of ideas, a blending of mindsets, and the quiet hum of something world-changing just beneath the surface. Elon, ever the pragmatist, found himself balancing his usual schedule of SpaceX launches, Tesla advancements, and the unpredictability of everyday life with Ethan's relentless pursuit of knowledge. At first, Elon had thought Ethan's idea about faster-than-light travel was just a child's fantasy, an impossible dream that defied physics and everything they knew about the universe. But as the weeks went by, and as Elon began diving deeper into Ethan's theories, a different picture began to emerge. Ethan was not just a child playing with big ideas. He was a child who saw a hidden thread that no one else had noticed, a thread that could connect the impossible with the possible. "Mr. Musk, I've been thinking about how we could harness the energy needed for a warp field," Ethan said one day as they sat across from each other in the conference room at SpaceX. The room was filled with whiteboards covered in equations, diagrams, and rough sketches that had become the blueprint for their growing partnership. "Right," Elon replied, furrowing his brow as he scribbled down notes. "I understand the basic concept, but how do we generate enough power to warp space-time without tearing the fabric of reality apart in the process?" Ethan smiled, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "That's the fun part. What if the key isn't just energy? What if it's the manipulation of gravitational waves? I've been reading some papers on black holes and Hawking radiation. I think we can use the properties of these phenomena to create a controlled gravitational anomaly, a stable warp bubble that allows for faster-than-light travel." Elon sat back, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Black holes? Hawking radiation? This was beyond anything even the most seasoned astrophysicists dared to theorize. But the more Ethan spoke, the more it seemed like it made sense, at least in a theoretical sense. "You're suggesting we manipulate gravity itself," Elon said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's insane. But then again, I've spent my life doing things that were considered insane. Ethan nodded eagerly. Exactly. And we don't have to start with a whole ship. We could begin small. A drone, maybe, just to see if the warp bubble could be created and maintained on a microscopic scale. Elon's mind raced as he thought about the implications. A warp bubble, an artificial distortion in space-time. It was something that had been considered impossible for so long, and yet here was a 12-year-old boy proposing a way to do it. The audacity of the idea sent a shiver down his spine, but there was something about Ethan's calm, methodical approach that made him consider the impossible seriously. You want to test this theory, Elon said, his voice becoming more focused. But we need to know more than just the math. We need to understand how to control the forces involved. I'm not just talking about bending space. I'm talking about bending the rules of nature itself. This is next-level stuff. Ethan grinned. I know, and that's why I need you. I can work out the theory, but I need someone who can help me make it real. Someone who can take those ideas and turn them into something physical. You've done it with rockets. You've done it with electric cars. Why not warp drive? Elon's lips curled into a half-smile. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, Ethan replied, but it's possible. I'm certain of it. There was silence between them for a few moments. Elon looked out the window at the SpaceX headquarters, where the towering rockets stood like silent sentinels. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine the impossible. Spaceships zipping through the stars, bending space-time itself, humanity becoming an interstellar species. It was a tantalizing vision, one that could change the course of human history. But then reality hit. Ethan, you're talking about breaking the known laws of physics. This kind of research, this kind of technology, will get us labeled as crackpots before anyone even takes us seriously. Ethan didn't flinch. Let them. The world always laughs at the impossible until it happens. Elon smiled again, his mind already turning. This kid had the same fire in his eyes that Elon had seen in the mirror all those years ago, back when he was trying to convince people that electric cars could work, or that private space exploration was a viable option. You might be right, Elon said. All right, let's start small, but we need to keep this under wraps. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure no one sabotages the idea before it even gets off the ground. Ethan nodded, his eyes gleaming. I understand. As the days went by, they worked in secret. Elon made sure that Ethan was surrounded by the best minds in physics, quantum mechanics, and aerospace engineering. People who, although skeptical, were willing to entertain the impossible. Elon had always been able to surround himself with brilliant people, but this project was unlike anything they had ever tackled. They were venturing into uncharted territory, and every step was a risk. The team built simulations. They ran tests. They experimented with different materials and technologies. Elon even pulled in his best engineers from Tesla, thinking that their knowledge of electric propulsion and energy efficiency could offer new ways to approach the challenge. They were building something entirely new, and the pressure was mounting with each passing day. But through it all, Ethan remained calm, focused. He worked tirelessly alongside the engineers, explaining concepts that most of them could barely grasp. They were amazed at his depth of understanding. Some of them began to wonder how much of what they were doing was possible, and how much of it was simply the product of a prodigious mind that refused to acknowledge limits. One evening, after hours of tinkering and revising, they were ready to test their first prototype. It was small, nothing more than a drone, fitted with a makeshift generator capable of producing the energy needed to create a warp field. I think this is it, Elon said, standing in front of the control panel, his hands steady but his heart racing. Ethan, standing beside him, looked at the screen with a mixture of excitement and nerves. This is just the beginning. As the countdown began, Elon couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. He had faced challenges before. Harder challenges, bigger obstacles. But this was different. This was a leap into the unknown. As the drone powered up, Elon's voice was barely audible over the hum of the machine. Here we go. Let's see if we can change the future. The air in the lab was thick with anticipation. The walls of SpaceX's hidden experimental section, far from the prying eyes of the public, echoed with the hum of machines and the soft click of keyboards. Elon stood by the control panel, fingers resting lightly on the buttons, his eyes fixed on the screen. The team, a mix of engineers and physicists, were clustered around him, their faces a mix of skepticism and excitement. Ethan stood next to Elon, his expression unreadable, but the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed the nervous energy that had been building in him for weeks. "You sure this is going to work?" one of the engineers asked, his voice low, but loud enough to be heard over the noise of the lab. Elon didn't respond right away. He simply nodded toward Ethan, who had already begun double-checking the calculations one last time. Ethan looked up, his eyes gleaming with a combination of calm assurance and youthful excitement. "We're as ready as we'll ever be," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't going to be perfect, but it will be a step closer." "Step closer to what?" another physicist asked, his arms crossed in disbelief. "Faster than light travel? You're saying we can create a warp bubble in here? You're kidding, right?" "I said it wasn't going to be perfect," Ethan repeated, unfazed. "But it's going to show us whether it's possible or not." The atmosphere in the room was electric, but beneath the bravado, there was a thread of tension. The team had spent days developing the generator, a hybrid between advanced quantum reactors and electromagnetic coils designed to simulate the energy required to form a warp field. They had done the math, followed the simulations, but no one could say with certainty whether this was going to work or whether they were about to witness the collapse of space-time itself. Elon glanced over at the drone, a small, sleek, metallic object resting in the center of the test platform. It was nothing more than a test vehicle, a proof of concept, if you will. The drone was designed to be small, lightweight, and aerodynamic, but it contained one of the most complex energy systems ever created. The warp bubble it was meant to generate was still a mystery, a theory in motion. "All right," Elon said, breaking the silence. "We're doing this. Ethan, you're up?" Ethan nodded, stepping forward to activate the system. The engineers cleared a space, and the room fell into silence as Ethan began the countdown. 3, 2, 1. He pressed a button, and a faint hum filled the room. At first, nothing seemed to happen. There was a low, almost imperceptible vibration in the air. But then there it was. A faint shimmer appeared around the drone, like heat waves rising off the pavement on a hot day. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a ripple of awe through the room. Elon felt his pulse quicken. The shimmer grew more intense, then began to fluctuate in an unnatural way, expanding and contracting, as if the very space around the drone was bending. For a moment, everything was silent, and then, boom, the lights flickered. The room shook. For a split second, it seemed like the entire building was going to collapse. The drone shuddered on its platform, spinning wildly in place, before suddenly going still. The warp bubble had expanded far beyond its expected parameters, too far, too fast. But then, everything stopped. The room was filled with an eerie calm, the hum of the machine now replaced by silence. No one moved for a moment. Is it over?" one of the engineers finally asked, his voice barely audible. Ethan didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached for a small display screen next to the platform, watching the data scroll across it. His face, normally a picture of calm, was now etched with deep concentration. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his face breaking into a small, but satisfied, grin. "It worked," Ethan said, his voice filled with wonder. Elon stepped forward, his eyes scanning the drone, which now appeared completely undisturbed by the chaos it had just gone through. The warp bubble had dissipated, but the residual energy readings were still active. It wasn't just the shimmer they had seen. It was real, actual, measurable proof that they had created a localized distortion in space-time. The impossible had happened. "But it didn't stay stable," Elon said, frowning. "It went out of control. This thing could have torn the building apart." Ethan's grin didn't fade. "We didn't expect stability on the first try, but now we know it's possible. We just need to refine the power output, the energy distribution, and then we stabilize it." Elon stared at him, his mind racing. This was it. They had just proven that warp travel, something that had only existed in science fiction, was not just a theoretical possibility. It could be done. The data was there, even if the application was far from perfect. "I'm not sure this is the breakthrough we wanted," one of the engineers said, looking at the mess of data on the screens. The energy fluctuation alone would take years to stabilize, not to mention the danger it posed. "Are we really ready for this?" Ethan turned to the engineer, his voice firm. "We're not looking for perfect today. We're looking for possibility. And we found it." The rest of the team remained silent. The success of the experiment was undeniable, but there was an undercurrent of fear, of uncertainty. No one knew the true implications of what had just been unleashed. Creating a warp bubble wasn't just about bending space. It was about challenging everything they knew about physics, reality, and even the future of humanity. Elon turned back to the drone, his eyes narrowed. "All right, we've got a long road ahead of us. But we're not backing down now." Over the next few days, the results of the test were carefully analyzed. While the warp bubble had been created, it had only lasted for a fraction of a second, and the energy required to sustain it was far beyond anything that had been predicted. The readings were chaotic, with fluctuations that seemed to suggest a kind of instability, a danger that could have catastrophic consequences if left unchecked. But none of that mattered to Elon, or to Ethan. They had crossed a threshold, a line that separated the known from the unknown. And once you crossed that line, there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the lab was filled with renewed energy. The test results were dissected, tweaked, and reworked. There was no room for failure anymore. They were on the precipice of something extraordinary, something that could change the world forever. Elon had always said that the future wasn't a place we were going. It was something we were creating. Now, standing in the lab surrounded by people who had witnessed the birth of the impossible, Elon knew that the future had just begun. And this time, they wouldn't just be changing the future, they would be shaping it. As he looked at Ethan, still absorbed in the calculations, Elon realized that this journey, this leap into the unknown, wasn't just about science. It was about the people who dared to make the impossible possible. And Ethan, more than anyone else, had proven that sometimes the greatest discoveries don't come from those who follow the rules, but from those who dare to break them. The days following their first successful warp bubble test were a blur of data analysis, long meetings, and brainstorming sessions. SpaceX's headquarters felt more like a lab from a science fiction novel than a cutting-edge aerospace company. Elon had always surrounded himself with brilliant engineers, but now, with Ethan's ideas taking center stage, the lab seemed to hum with a sense of urgency. Everyone involved knew they were working on something that could change the course of history. But at the same time, the risks were clearer than ever. Elon and Ethan were no longer just testing theoretical concepts, they were pushing the very boundaries of what was known about physics, reality, and the fabric of the universe. As the team worked tirelessly to refine the warp bubble prototype, the stakes grew higher. It wasn't just the engineers and scientists who were beginning to take notice. Rumors of their progress began to trickle into the world outside the lab. Quiet whispers among the scientific community, some of them filled with disbelief, others with excitement. But it wasn't just academics who were watching. The world of geopolitics, business, and military strategy would soon be paying attention as well. "Do you ever stop and think about what we're doing?" Ethan asked one afternoon as they sat together in the lab, their eyes fixed on a new set of equations. The familiar hum of the machines seemed to fade into the background as he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. Elon leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The stress of the project was starting to show in the fine lines around his eyes, but his determination remained unshaken. "I don't have time to think. We've got a chance to do something bigger than anything anyone ever imagined. There's no turning back now." Ethan's gaze lingered on the equations for a moment longer. "I know, but think about it. If this works, we could be the first people to break the speed of light. We could be the first to leave Earth and explore the stars. But if it fails, we're dealing with forces that could destroy everything." Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the control panel, his fingers brushing across the various monitors. He was always the first to dive headfirst into the unknown, but even he could feel the weight of what they were attempting. Their warp bubble could be the key to unlocking space travel, but it also had the potential to tear apart the very fabric of space-time. Failure's always a risk, Elon finally said, his voice steady. But we don't get anywhere by playing it safe. We've never been about playing it safe. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes bright with both excitement and apprehension. Yeah, but this is different. People aren't going to look at us the same way if this works. They'll either call us geniuses or madmen. Elon smiled wryly. Most of history's great discoveries were made by people who were called madmen. That night, as they continued to refine the warp bubble prototype, a new problem emerged. The energy needed to maintain a stable warp bubble was still far beyond anything they had ever anticipated. The prototypes, small as they were, required more power than their current systems could generate, and every attempt to stabilize the bubble led to severe energy fluctuations. More often than not, the entire system would overload, sending surges of unstable energy through the lab, leaving the team scrambling to prevent total failure. Elon stood over the monitors, eyes scanning the data with a sharp focus. There's a limit to how much energy the system can handle. We need a new approach. This isn't just about power output, it's about control. We need to figure out how to modulate the energy across the system without triggering a collapse. Ethan was already at his side, his mind working quickly. I've been thinking about this. The warp bubble isn't just about using power. It's about directing it in a way that we can sustain without triggering a chain reaction. We need a way to isolate the energy into specific quantum fields that prevent it from leaking into space-time. Elon was silent for a moment, considering Ethan's words. Then, without warning, he turned to one of the senior engineers, who had been watching the exchange from across the room. We need to redesign the core. Now, we're not just generating energy anymore. We're creating a microcosm of a black hole. The stabilization process has to be more sophisticated. The engineers rushed to their stations, beginning to sketch new designs. The pressure was building, but there was no other option. The next day, as the team worked through a new set of blueprints and simulations, an unexpected visitor arrived. Elon's assistant, Mia, walked into the lab with a serious expression. Elon, there's someone here to see you. Elon barely looked up, his hands still on the touch screen of his laptop. Tell them to schedule an appointment. I'm a little busy right now. Mia hesitated. It's the Department of Defense. They're aware of what we've been working on. Elon froze. The room suddenly felt smaller, the weight of the moment settling in. The Department of Defense? How did they find out? You said no one knew about this, Elon said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I didn't tell anyone, Mia replied, her face pale. But they know. The door opened, and two men in sharp suits entered. One was tall, with a stern expression and an air of authority. The other was shorter, but his eyes were sharp, like a predator watching its prey. I'm Colonel Carter, the tall man said. This is Agent Walker. He gave a nod toward the other man. We've been briefed on your little project. Elon stood up, his expression cold. I'm sure you have. I've already got my security team working on this. If you've come here to try and shut us down, we're not here to shut you down, Carter interrupted, his voice calm but firm. But we are here to ensure that your experiment doesn't put the country and the world in danger. The room grew tense. Elon felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The military had been trying to get into space exploration for years, and now they were on the brink of witnessing a breakthrough in travel that could completely reshape global power dynamics. But what they didn't know was that Elon and Ethan weren't just trying to create new weapons. They were trying to unlock the future of humanity itself. We're aware of the risks, Elon said slowly, locking eyes with Carter. And we're doing everything we can to make sure it works. But this isn't just about the U.S. government. This is about the future of space exploration. If we succeed, it won't just be the U.S. that benefits. It will be everyone. The two men exchanged a look. Finally, Colonel Carter spoke. We're not here to interfere with your work, yet, but we will be monitoring the situation. Any failure on your part could have severe consequences. Elon nodded, his mind racing. He wasn't worried about the government getting involved. He was used to that. But the truth was, if they couldn't control the energy and stabilize the warp bubble soon, it wouldn't just be the government they'd have to worry about. There were others watching. Others who might not be as understanding. That night, as Elon lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of the conversation with the Department of Defense lingered in his mind. He thought about the future, the stars, the possibility of interstellar travel, the dream of reaching other galaxies. But he also thought about the risks, the potential for disaster if they didn't get it right. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no going back now. If they succeeded, they would change everything. But if they failed, everything could fall apart. Tomorrow, they would try again. And the stakes were higher than ever. The next few weeks were filled with an air of tense anticipation. The Department of Defense had made their presence known, but as Elon expected, their warnings weren't going to stop him. In fact, they only pushed him further, cementing his resolve to prove that they were on the verge of something groundbreaking. He had always known that his work would be controversial. Whether it was revolutionizing electric cars, conquering Mars, or now breaking the speed of light, Elon Musk had always been a disruptor. But this was different. The implications of what he and Ethan were attempting reached far beyond any single company, nation, or even humanity itself. It was a risk that could either unlock a new era of exploration or bring destruction unlike anything the world had ever known. Elon had been down this road before, but with this project, there was no room for failure. The team had spent countless hours trying to stabilize the energy fields around the warp bubble. Ethan had become more of a recluse in the lab, his once bright enthusiasm now tempered by the weight of the work they were undertaking. The initial excitement had faded, replaced by the grim realization of how delicate their situation had become. Every test was a balancing act. Too little power, and the bubble would collapse. Too much, and they risked tearing apart space-time itself. It was during one of these late-night sessions that something unexpected happened. "Ethan, take a look at this," Elon called out, a note of excitement in his voice. Ethan, who had been hunched over a terminal, immediately turned to Elon, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. The data streaming across Elon's screen was strange, unlike anything they had seen before. The warp bubble they had generated had been fluctuating erratically, but this time, it wasn't just the usual instability. There was something else. The bubble was moving. "No way," Ethan muttered, approaching the screen. He tapped a few keys and zoomed in on the data. "That's impossible. It's traveling." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "Is it supposed to do that?" Ethan's brow furrowed as he thought it through. "No, it shouldn't be able to move like that. But this could be it. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for." Elon stood still, taking in the implications of what Ethan had just said. If the warp bubble wasn't just stable, but mobile, if it could travel, it would be the key to interstellar flight. In theory, they could travel faster than the speed of light. They could traverse the entire galaxy in a matter of days. For the first time in weeks, Elon allowed himself to feel something resembling hope. "We need to replicate it. Immediately." As the team scrambled to understand what was happening, the Department of Defense's presence loomed over the lab like a dark cloud. Elon and Ethan had made it clear they weren't interested in waiting for permission, but the government had been vigilant, sending agents to monitor their progress. In a way, it was a blessing and a curse. They had become the center of a new kind of race, a race not just for the future of space travel, but for global supremacy. And while Elon had always embraced competition, this time the stakes were much higher. Late one afternoon, while Ethan and Elon were working on recalibrating the energy core, an alert flashed on Elon's screen. It was from Mia. "Elon, you need to come to the conference room. Now." He had no idea what this was about, but he could tell by the tone of her message that something important was happening. Without a word, he stood up and walked toward the conference room, Ethan trailing behind. As they entered the room, the atmosphere immediately shifted. Colonel Carter and Agent Walker were already seated at the table, their faces tight with concern. Elon felt the weight of their gaze before even hearing a word. "Gentlemen," Elon said, maintaining a calm that he didn't feel, "I'm assuming this is about the project." Carter nodded, his posture stiff. "Yes, and it's not just about the project anymore, Mr. Musk." Elon raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Agent Walker, a man whose cool demeanor never seemed to crack, spoke next. "We've been monitoring your work for the past few weeks. The fact is, your tests have moved into dangerous territory. You're not just creating a warp bubble. You've unlocked something more. Elon's chest tightened. He could feel the conversation veering towards something he hadn't anticipated. What are you talking about? Carter leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Your warp bubble tests have gone beyond the theoretical. It's not just stable. It's moving. And with that, you're on the verge of something we cannot fully comprehend yet. We don't know if it's just a breakthrough or if you're opening doors that should remain closed. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Elon couldn't deny the truth in what they were saying. The test had advanced far beyond what anyone had anticipated. So what now? Elon asked, his voice steady, though inside he was calculating the risks, the potential benefits, the future. We need to contain it, Carter said flatly. Immediately. We need to make sure this doesn't get out of hand. Elon felt his pulse quicken. Contain it? You're asking us to shut down everything we've worked for. I'm asking you to work with us to ensure that what you've created doesn't endanger everything we've built, Carter said, his tone turning more insistent. You're opening up Pandora's box, Musk. If this goes wrong, it won't just be your company's problem. It'll be everyone's. Ethan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice full of frustration. We're not opening Pandora's box. We're unlocking the future. The next step in human evolution. You don't get to just shut it down because you're afraid of the unknown. Carter's gaze flicked to Ethan, but he didn't flinch. We're not afraid, but we know the risks. And right now, you don't. Elon's mind raced. He had always prided himself on taking risks, calculated risks, of course, but now, he wasn't sure whether the risks they were facing were something even he could control. He turned to Mia, who was standing quietly by the door, her face unreadable. She had been in the room when the bubble had started moving. She knew more than anyone about the potential consequences. Mia, he said, his voice soft. What do you think? She met his gaze for a moment before speaking. I think we need to move forward with caution. We're in uncharted territory here. But I also believe we're on the verge of something truly groundbreaking. Elon glanced at Ethan, who gave him a single, silent nod. The decision was made. They couldn't stop now. Not when they were this close. We continue, Elon said, his voice resolute, but we'll do it safely, and we'll work with you. But I won't let fear stop progress. Not this time. Carter and Walker exchanged a glance. They knew they had lost this round, but they weren't giving up. The battle for control over what Musk and his team had uncovered was just beginning. The moment the door clicked shut behind the Department of Defense agents, Elon turned to Ethan, his voice low. We keep going, but we move fast. If they're watching us now, they'll be even more focused after this. Ethan nodded. We're ready. Let's do this. As they walked back into the lab, the weight of their decision pressed down on them, but there was no turning back. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, the possibilities seemed endless. They weren't just on the verge of creating a new technology. They were on the brink of redefining reality itself. And nothing, not even the government, was going to stop them. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The stakes had never been higher. As Elon and his team prepared for their next series of tests, the pressure was mounting from all sides. The government had increased its surveillance, and media outlets had begun to buzz with rumors about what was happening in the underground lab. The whispers of a scientific breakthrough, one that could alter the very fabric of space-time, were reaching far beyond the walls of their research facility. For Elon, the quiet moments of reflection were few and far between. As he paced around the lab late one night, he found himself wondering whether they were truly ready for the consequences of what they were attempting. Sure, the warp bubble was moving, but what did it mean in the grand scheme of things? The risks were impossible to fully measure, but the potential, was nothing short of revolutionary. In the center of the lab, Ethan was hunched over a control panel, fingers flying across the keyboard as he monitored the progress of their next test. The energy readings had been fluctuating wildly for the past hour, and they still weren't sure what they were dealing with. Elon stepped up beside him. You're pushing the limits of what we can do here. I know, Ethan said, not looking up from the screen, but we're running out of time. If we don't push it now, we may never get another chance. This is it. Elon studied the readouts. They were showing patterns that didn't quite make sense, flashes of energy that were more than just distortion. If the readings are right, it's happening. The warp bubble isn't just moving in space. It's starting to affect time itself. The realization hit Elon with the force of a sledgehammer. For months, they had been working toward faster-than-light travel, but what they were inadvertently creating was far more dangerous. The bubble wasn't just a vehicle for space. It was a gateway, a rift between dimensions. This could be catastrophic, Elon muttered under his breath. Ethan glanced up at him. Or it could be the key to everything. We're talking about bending the very laws of physics, Elon. This is more than just space travel. This could be the future of humanity. Elon swallowed, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping into his gut. But Ethan's words had hit a nerve. The implications were massive and terrifying. Later that evening, after another round of testing, the team gathered for a brief break. Elon leaned against a table, staring into the distance, while the others huddled together, discussing the finer points of their latest findings. Mia approached, her eyes narrowed in thought. Elon, I've been thinking, she began cautiously. You remember the readings from last week, right? The ones that spiked just before the bubble began to move? I'm starting to believe that wasn't just some anomaly. Elon turned toward her, his interest piqued. Go on. Those spikes weren't just energy surges, Mia continued. They were quantum fluctuations. Something in the fabric of reality itself is being disturbed. It's like the bubble is warping the space-time continuum, rippling outwards and causing small, but significant, shifts in how time operates within its influence. Elon's mind raced. A quantum rift? He had always suspected that what they were doing could affect the space-time continuum, but this was something else entirely. If they weren't careful, they could end up tearing a hole in the very structure of the universe. What are you saying, Mia? Elon asked, his voice tight. I'm saying we might be on the verge of creating a quantum rift, Mia said quietly. A tear in the fabric of space and time. If we don't control the energy field surrounding that bubble, if we push it too far, we could end up with something much bigger than we bargained for. Elon's stomach clenched. The room felt suddenly too small, the air thick with the gravity of what Mia was implying. A quantum rift wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of disaster that could unravel everything. We have to stop testing, Elon said, his voice low but resolute. If there's even a chance of creating a rift, we can't risk it. We need more time to study the data, figure out what's really going on. But Ethan, who had been listening from the edge of the room, suddenly stepped forward, his eyes blazing. No, we've come too far to stop now. Elon met Ethan's gaze, feeling the weight of his words. You heard Mia. If we keep pushing, it could destroy everything. The future of science, of humanity, could be at risk. Ethan shook his head, his voice cracking with a mixture of frustration and passion. You're thinking small, Elon. We're on the verge of something massive. This could change the world. You've always said that you're about pushing the limits, about doing what others say is impossible. Well, this is it. This is your chance. The two men stood there, the tension between them palpable. Ethan wanted to move forward, to take the leap and unlock the full potential of their work. But Elon was beginning to wonder if they were truly ready for the consequences of that leap. He knew they couldn't turn back. But did they have control over the power they were unleashing? Just as the conversation reached a breaking point, the alarm went off. The lab's emergency system kicked into gear, and a loud, shrill warning echoed throughout the facility. Something's happening, Mia said, her voice tight with fear. The lights flickered. The warp bubble that had been contained in its energy field seemed to pulse, glowing brighter and more erratically than ever before. The room shook as if an earthquake was rippling through the facility. Shut it down, Elon shouted, rushing to the control panel. He slammed his hand down on the emergency stop button, but it was too late. A loud, deafening roar filled the air, and the room plunged into darkness. When Elon regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold concrete floor of the lab. His head throbbed with pain, and for a moment, he couldn't remember what had happened. But then the memories came rushing back, the warning alarms, the glow of the bubble, the shaking, and the terrifying realization that they had pushed too far. Ethan? Elon called out weakly. A groan answered him. Ethan slowly sat up from the corner of the room, looking disoriented but alive. His clothes were singed, and there were cuts on his face, but he was breathing steadily. We've got a problem, Ethan muttered. Elon struggled to his feet, his mind racing. What happened? What's going on with the bubble? Ethan glanced at the far side of the lab, where the containment field was still glowing with energy. But something was wrong. The bubble was no longer stable. It was shifting erratically, and the air around it shimmered as if reality itself was warping. Elon, Ethan whispered, I think we've done it. We've created a rift. The hum of the lab was deafening. It wasn't the usual hum of equipment running smoothly. This was something else. The air itself seemed charged, crackling with raw energy, as if the very fabric of reality was being twisted and stretched beyond its limits. Elon stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the shimmering energy field that had once contained the warp bubble. Now, it had grown unstable, fluctuating violently, sending ripples through the air that made the walls of the lab seem to bend. Is it? Ethan started, his voice barely audible above the noise. Is it opening? Elon didn't have the answer. His mind was racing, trying to process what they were seeing. The rift, whatever it was, had taken on a strange, almost liquid-like appearance, pulsing in and out of existence like the heartbeat of some otherworldly force. It wasn't just a tear. It was alive, changing shape, expanding with an energy that seemed far too powerful for anything they had ever encountered. We need to get out of here, Mia said urgently, her face pale. She had been the first to see the early signs of instability in the bubble, but even she hadn't anticipated this. Elon didn't move. His mind was caught between two realities: the instinct to run for safety and the overwhelming drive to understand what was happening. What was this rift? What had they unlocked? It's not just a rift, Mia, he said, his voice hoarse. It's a doorway, a portal to something else. Ethan glanced around, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. It's like it's alive. I can feel it. It's pulling at everything around it. Elon took a deep breath. This is exactly what we feared. The bubble. It's interacting with the quantum field in a way we didn't expect. We've created a breach between dimensions. Mia shook her head, disbelief written across her face. Dimensions? You mean, you're saying this is a gateway to another universe? Before Elon could respond, the rift suddenly expanded, swallowing up the containment field entirely. The energy within it surged, crackling with raw power, and the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. They could feel it in their bones. The presence of something ancient, something vast and incomprehensible, was pushing against the fabric of their world. And then, in an instant, the rift collapsed. The air was still. For a moment, nothing happened. The rift had vanished. The lab was silent, the usual hum of machinery returning, as if nothing had ever happened. But something had changed. The very walls of the lab felt different, like they had been subtly altered, stretched, or compressed. The air had a different quality, as though it were charged with an invisible force. Elon didn't trust the silence. Check the readings, he barked at Ethan. Are the sensors still intact? Ethan rushed over to the control panel, his hands shaking as he typed furiously. The data streams began to populate the screen, and Ethan's face turned pale as he looked up at Elon. Elon, this isn't good. The rift, it's still there, in the quantum field. But it's different. It's not like before. It's interwoven with reality now. Elon's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, interwoven? It's like it's left an imprint, a mark on the quantum fabric of space-time. It's not just a one-time event. It's a lingering effect, Ethan said, his voice trembling with the weight of his words. We didn't just open a door, Elon. We left it open. The news spread quickly. The government had been monitoring their tests from afar, but they hadn't been prepared for the scale of what had just occurred. Before long, a convoy of military vehicles arrived outside the research facility, a black SUV pulling up first. Colonel Carter was the first to step out, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. Elon, he said, his voice tight, we need to talk. Now. Elon, his mind still racing, nodded, and led Carter inside. They didn't have time to waste. Inside the control room, Carter wasted no time. "We've been running simulations based on your data, and it's worse than we thought. This rift you've created isn't just an anomaly. It's spreading. It's affecting the fabric of reality." Elon could see the panic in Carter's eyes. For the first time, the colonel seemed like he didn't know what to do. "We need to shut this down," Carter continued, his voice clipped. "Contain it before it gets out of hand." Elon shook his head, refusing to accept the defeat. "We can't. We've opened something far more powerful than we anticipated. Shutting it down now could make things worse. We need to understand it. Contain it, yes. But we also need to learn how to control it." Carter's face hardened. "Control it? You're talking about playing with fire, Musk? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't intend to create a rift," Elon replied sharply. "But we're not just dealing with a scientific breakthrough anymore. We're dealing with something that could change the course of history. I'm not about to back down from that." Carter looked like he was about to argue, but instead, he sighed deeply. "Fine, but we're not doing this alone. We'll need the full cooperation of the military and the Department of Energy. This is beyond your lab now. We need resources, and we need protection. This rift, whatever it is, could be the most dangerous thing mankind has ever faced." Elon locked eyes with him, his mind whirring with calculations, but beneath it all, a small, unshakable voice whispered, "What if this is it? What if we've finally found the key to the universe? Then let's find out what it really is," Elon said, "before it's too late." Hours later, the lab was swarming with military personnel, scientists, and engineers from every corner of the globe. The magnitude of what had happened was finally settling in. While the team continued to monitor the rift's fluctuating effects, others began poring over the data, looking for patterns, correlations, and signs of impending disaster. Elon felt a strange sense of unease. They had opened a door, there was no denying that. But what was on the other side? And what would they do once they figured out what it meant for the future of mankind? Mia had been studying the quantum field anomalies for hours when she called Elon over. "Elon, you need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. "We've detected something. A signature. Something coming through the rift." Elon's heart pounded as he approached the screen. The readings were off the charts, flickers of data that didn't belong to any known system, resembling energy patterns that could only be described as alien in nature. "I think it's a message," Mia said, her fingers dancing over the controls as she worked to isolate the signal. "A message?" Elon echoed, incredulous. But Mia's face was pale, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were wide with fear. "It's not just a message. It's a warning." The air in the lab felt heavy with tension. Elon stood before the large screen, staring at the alien signal that had just emerged through the rift. The patterns on the display were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Jagged, erratic, but unmistakably deliberate. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate across the dimensions. Mia's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, trying to decipher the signal, but it was no use. The data was incomprehensible to their systems. The more they tried to analyze it, the more it seemed to distort, slipping just out of reach. "This isn't just random noise," Mia muttered under her breath. "It's too structured, too organized. This is intentional." Elon felt a shiver run down his spine. He had been prepared for some kind of consequence when they opened the rift, but this was something entirely new. It wasn't just a tear in space-time. It was as if they had opened a doorway to another intelligence. "What if this is a warning?" Mia asked, her voice quiet. "What if whatever's on the other side doesn't want us to keep going?" Elon didn't respond immediately. He was too focused on the flickering symbols on the screen, trying to make sense of the nonsensical. It almost looked like a series of pulses, each one followed by a strange arrangement of geometric shapes. It reminded him of something ancient, something from a time long before humans ever considered the possibility of exploring other dimensions. Could it be from another civilization? Ethan's voice broke through his thoughts. He had been standing silently in the corner, watching the screen as well. A warning of some kind from an advanced species? Elon considered the possibility, but deep down, he knew that was too simplistic. This wasn't just a message from another species. The complexity of the signal suggested something far more profound, something beyond their current understanding. "We need to get this data to the others," Elon said, breaking the silence. "Mia, send everything you've got to our allies at CERN. They might be able to interpret this. They have the quantum computing power we don't." Mia nodded, already transferring the data. As she did, Elon's mind raced with questions. What were they dealing with? What if this was more than just a message from another world? What if it was an invitation, or worse, a trap? Hours passed, and the team continued to work around the clock, trying to decode the signal. Every new breakthrough only seemed to lead to more questions. The signal wasn't just static, it was evolving. The patterns were shifting, and every time they thought they had a breakthrough, the signal would change, morphing into something else, as if it was responding to their attempts to decipher it. Just as Elon was about to ask Mia for another update, his phone buzzed. It was a video call from Dr. Sandra Valente, the lead physicist at CERN, someone Elon had worked with for years on cutting-edge quantum research. "Elon," Sandra greeted him, her face tight with concern, "I've been looking over the data you sent us. This is not a natural phenomenon. It's too precise. The structure of this signal, there's something about it that seems intentional." "Tell me something I don't know," Elon replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you decode it?" Sandra's eyes darkened. "We've made some headway, but what we're seeing isn't just information. It's almost like a blueprint. A set of instructions, if you will." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "Instructions? For what?" "We're not sure yet," Sandra admitted, "but it seems to be a map. A set of coordinates, perhaps coordinates that don't belong to any place we know of. And it's directing us to, well, something." "Something?" Elon echoed, confused. "Where?" "Somewhere deep within the rift," Sandra replied. "And Elon, I think the message is clear. It's asking us to come. It's urging us to follow the coordinates." Elon sat in stunned silence as Sandra's words settled over him like a weight. A map, instructions, a call to action. Mia turned to Elon, her face pale. "You don't think this could be a trap, do you?" "I don't know," Elon said, running a hand through his hair. "But the rift is already destabilizing. It's only a matter of time before it becomes something we can't control. We have to find out what this is before it's too late." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of the situation. The rift was more than just an anomaly now. It was an active, living force, and it seemed to be reaching out, pulling them deeper into its mystery. Ethan spoke up, his voice hesitant. "What if we follow it? What if we go through?" Elon's gaze flicked toward him. The idea had been floating at the back of his mind ever since the signal first appeared. Could they really go through? Could they survive whatever lay on the other side? "Do we have a choice?" Elon asked quietly, his voice full of resolve. "We've already opened it. We can't just ignore it." Mia shook her head. "You can't be serious. We don't know what we're dealing with here, Elon. We're talking about the fabric of reality itself. This could rip us apart." "I know," Elon replied, "but I didn't come this far to stop now. If this rift is what I think it is, if it really is a doorway to something beyond what we can imagine, then we have to explore it. Not just for science, but for humanity." The decision was made. The team would go through the rift, armed with as much technology as they could muster, but the risks were immense. They didn't know if they'd make it out on the other side, or if they'd even survive the journey. As the days passed, Elon and his team prepared for the unknown. They modified their equipment, adapting it for a journey into the rift's shifting and unpredictable quantum field. They worked tirelessly, even as the rift itself continued to expand, growing ever more powerful. The military had stepped in with additional resources, providing an array of protective gear and stabilization technology to keep the team safe during their journey. Colonel Carter was adamant that he wanted a full team of soldiers accompanying them, but Elon had refused. "No soldiers," Elon had said. "This is a scientific expedition, not a military operation." Finally, the day arrived. The team stood at the threshold, facing the rift. The air shimmered with energy, and the low hum of the quantum field vibrated through their bodies. "We're ready," Elon said, his voice steady. "This is it. No turning back. With a final glance at the team, Elon stepped forward, followed closely by Mia, Ethan, and the rest of the group. They stood at the edge of the rift, unsure of what lay on the other side, but certain of one thing. Whatever was waiting for them, it was going to change everything. The team stood at the edge of the rift, their breath shallow and their hearts pounding in their chests. The room was silent, save for the eerie hum of the quantum field, a constant vibration in the air that seemed to shake them to their core. It was as though the very fabric of reality was alive, breathing with them. Elon's mind raced as he stared at the rift, now pulsating like the opening of a massive portal, each beat of its energy reverberating through the walls of the lab. The coordinates from the message had led them here, to this precise moment, and now there was no turning back. The decision had been made. They were going through. This is it, Elon murmured, more to himself than anyone else. We either make history or we risk everything. Mia, standing beside him, checked the readings on her wrist device. The quantum field surrounding the rift was fluctuating wildly. It wasn't stable. The parameters they had once calculated, safeguards and margins of error, were slipping away in real time. Even now, the field was shifting, adapting, as if it had a will of its own. I don't like this, Mia said softly, glancing at Elon. Her voice carried an edge of fear, but also a strange sense of resolve. The quantum anomalies are getting worse. We don't know what will happen once we cross through. The rift's not just a doorway. It's more like a collapse. It could pull us in. I know, Elon said, meeting her gaze. But we can't back down now. We've crossed a line. It's either step through or let it consume us. The other team members gathered behind them, suited in protective gear designed to shield them from the rift's unknown dangers. They weren't soldiers, but they were prepared for whatever they might encounter. Ethan, the youngest but perhaps the most fearless, clutched his equipment nervously, his eyes scanning the growing anomaly. I've always wanted to know what's on the other side, Ethan said, his voice strangely calm. But this is next level. I don't know whether to be excited or terrified. It's both, Elon replied. But that's the nature of discovery. We'll make it through, together. The rest of the team nodded, though there was no mistaking the tension in the air. They weren't just scientists anymore. They were pioneers on the precipice of an unimaginable journey into the unknown. They crossed the threshold, one by one, stepping into the rift's shifting field. The world around them seemed to bend and twist, as though reality itself were unraveling. For a brief, terrifying moment, Elon felt like he was falling through an endless void. The floor beneath him disappeared, and the walls melted away into a black, swirling expanse. The very fabric of time and space was warping, pulling them in every direction. Hold on, Elon shouted, grabbing Mia's arm as the world around them spun. But it wasn't a fall. It was a journey, a passage through the fabric of reality itself. Their bodies were being compressed, stretched, and then reassembled as they moved through the rift. The sensation was disorienting, and Elon could hear nothing but the rush of static in his ears, as though their senses were being overloaded. Seconds stretched into minutes, and minutes into what felt like an eternity. Then, with a sudden jolt, the pressure released, and Elon was thrown forward, tumbling into a new world. The ground beneath him was solid. His feet hit the earth, and he stumbled, barely managing to keep his balance. Everyone okay? Elon called out, his voice hoarse, still adjusting to the sudden change. Mia landed beside him with a soft grunt, steadying herself. I think so, she said, looking around with wide eyes. What just happened? The team slowly gathered, their protective gear covered in dust, but they were all intact, alive, and now standing in a strange new world. The air was different, thicker, heavier, and yet somehow fresher. There was a sharpness to it, as if the very atmosphere was cleaner, more alive. Elon took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The rift behind them had closed, its energy fading, but the world in front of them was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. They were no longer in the lab, nor even on Earth. The landscape before them was alien, vast, and otherworldly. Towering structures loomed in the distance, their sharp angles and curved surfaces defying human architecture. It was clear that they weren't just in another dimension. They had arrived in another place, a world unlike anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The sky above them was a deep violet, swirling with luminous clouds that shifted like liquid, moving in patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The sun, or what passed for the sun, was a faint, glowing orb on the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Mia looked up, eyes wide with wonder. This is incredible. We've crossed into another reality. Elon nodded, the weight of it finally sinking in. They weren't just exploring space. They were exploring the fabric of existence itself. They had crossed through a rift between dimensions, to a place where the rules they had always known did not apply. But as his gaze swept across the alien horizon, a gnawing sense of unease settled in his gut. This place, it's too perfect, Elon murmured, almost like it's been waiting for us. As they moved forward, the team kept their eyes peeled, their senses alert for any signs of life, danger, or anomaly. Despite the beauty and majesty of the landscape, something about it felt wrong. The longer they walked, the more Elon noticed the subtle inconsistencies in the environment. There were no sounds, no birds, no wind, no wildlife. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan, ever the optimist, broke the silence. So, what now? Do we just explore? Look for answers? Elon thought for a moment. We need to understand what this place is, why it's here, and why the rift opened in the first place. We've crossed into unknown territory. There has to be a reason. Mia was scanning the environment, her mind working furiously. The map, remember the coordinates from the message? I think they might be pointing to that structure over there. She pointed toward the distant skyline, where the jagged silhouette of what appeared to be a massive tower rose above the barren landscape. It looked both ancient and futuristic, a fusion of shapes that defied explanation. Elon's heart quickened. That's where we need to go. Let's move. The journey toward the tower was long, but not difficult. As they walked, the landscape seemed to shift around them, almost as if the world itself was in flux. The ground beneath them occasionally rippled, and strange, pulsating lights would flare up in the distance, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. The closer they got to the tower, the more palpable the tension became. They could feel it in the air, a strange hum that vibrated through their bodies, syncing with the beat of their hearts. Finally, they reached the base of the structure. It was enormous, an impossibly high spire of sleek, metallic material that seemed to glow with an inner light. The surface was smooth, but there were symbols etched into the walls, symbols that matched the ones from the signal. Elon, Mia said, her voice trembling slightly, I think we're supposed to. Before she could finish, the ground trembled. The tower itself seemed to respond to their presence, its surface shifting and undulating, as if alive. The air around them hummed louder, and Elon felt a surge of energy wash over him. Then, the tower's surface parted, revealing an entrance. A dark, swirling vortex waited within, a doorway to whatever lay beyond. Elon took a deep breath, then turned to his team. This is it. Whatever's on the other side, we go through together. And with that, the team stepped forward, ready to face whatever awaited them in this new world. The air around them buzzed with an electric charge, and the ground beneath their feet hummed as if resonating with the energy of the strange tower ahead. As Elon, Mia, Ethan, and the rest of the team approached the swirling vortex that had appeared in the structure's walls, they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of both awe and trepidation. The towering spire that had appeared to be dormant now pulsed with life, almost as if it had been waiting for them. Well, this is it, Mia said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming uncertainty that hung in the air. We're about to cross into whatever this is. Elon nodded. We don't know what's beyond this point, but we do know that we've come this far, and we're not turning back now. Ethan looked nervously at the dark void, his eyes wide with the thrill of discovery, but also with fear. Do you think there are other people here? Or something else? I don't know, Elon admitted, but we'll soon find out. There was no more time for questions. The portal beckoned them forward, and despite their reservations, each of them stepped through the shifting threshold. The moment they crossed the line, the world around them blurred, and the tunnel seemed to close in around them. The familiar sensation of being pulled, stretched, and compressed returned, but this time, it felt different, stronger, more deliberate. Elon gritted his teeth as the disorienting pressure increased, his head spinning as he tried to focus. Everything around him, the world, the people, everything seemed to collapse into a singular point. The air tasted metallic, and the walls of the vortex seemed to ripple with an otherworldly glow, casting strange shadows that danced like specters. And then, as suddenly as it began, the journey ended. They stumbled out of the vortex, landing on soft ground with a sharp intake of breath. Elon looked around, heart racing as he tried to make sense of their new surroundings. The world they had entered was nothing like what they had left behind. It was as though they had crossed into a completely different reality, a place where the laws of physics and nature didn't behave as they should. The sky above them was a swirl of vibrant, shifting colors, darker hues mixed with flashes of electric blue and deep purple that seemed to pulse rhythmically. The air, though thick and heavy, carried an almost intoxicating fragrance, like something from a dream. Massive, jagged rocks rose from the ground in all directions, their surfaces glowing with the same ethereal light that had come from the tower. The landscape stretched for miles, vast plains interrupted by floating islands, bizarre crystalline formations, and strange geometric patterns carved into the ground. "This is," Mia trailed off, her voice filled with awe. "This is like nothing I've ever seen before. It's beautiful, but it feels wrong." Ethan's eyes darted around nervously. "It's almost like we're not supposed to be here." "Don't be paranoid," Elon said, though his own instincts were raising flags. Something wasn't right here. He could feel it in his bones. This world was unnatural, but they had no choice but to push forward. They began walking forward, their steps uncertain as they tried to make sense of their surroundings. The team's eyes scanned every detail, searching for any sign of life or even a clue about where they had arrived. There were no signs of civilization, no structures, no pathways, no indication that anyone had ever lived here. The silence was deafening. It wasn't until they reached the foot of a towering, shimmering mountain that they encountered their first sign of life. The massive formation of crystal-like rock pulsated with a strange blue light, and as they approached, they heard something. It was faint at first, just a whisper, a hum, like the sound of wind chimes caught in a breeze. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. And then, from the crystalline surface, something began to form, shifting and swirling like smoke in the air. A figure materialized before them. It was humanoid, but not quite human. The figure was tall, its features soft and ethereal, as though it had been sculpted from light itself. Its skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and its eyes, huge and luminescent, glowed with an otherworldly intensity. It spoke without moving its lips, its voice resonating in their minds. "You have come," the figure said, its tone calm yet filled with authority. "Why have you crossed into our domain?" The team froze, the air thick with tension. Elon instinctively stepped forward, the leader of the group, trying to maintain some semblance of control in the face of the unknown. Elon began, but the words died in his throat. What could they possibly say? How did you explain to an alien being that you had stumbled into its domain by accident after crossing a rift that had opened unexpectedly? The figure tilted its head slightly, as if sensing his confusion. It continued, its voice more intense now, though still calm. "The rift. It was opened for a reason. But you must understand, there are consequences. Crossing into this space is not a simple matter. You are not the first to come, and you will not be the last." Mia stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? What is this place? Who are you?" The figure's glowing eyes narrowed. "We are the gatekeepers. We guard the thresholds between worlds, and those who pass through without understanding, without preparation, will be lost." The words hung in the air like a warning. Elon felt a wave of unease wash over him. They had entered a place far beyond their understanding, and now it seemed that they were not just explorers, they were intruders. "We didn't mean any harm," Elon said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "We didn't know what we were doing. We came to learn, to understand." The gatekeeper's eyes softened slightly. "Your arrival is no accident. The rift was not simply a door. It was a beacon, a signal sent out by those who came before you. The time of your arrival was destined. But that does not mean there will be no price." "Price?" Mia asked, her voice full of suspicion. "What price?" The gatekeeper remained silent for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Finally, it spoke again, its voice quiet and resonant. "The price is knowledge. The price is power. What you seek, you must earn." Elon could feel the weight of its words settling in. They were in a place that no one had ever encountered before, a place where the very rules of the universe seemed malleable. And now, they were being told that their journey had a cost. "What do you want from us?" Ethan asked, stepping forward boldly despite his nervousness. "We're not here to take anything. We just want to learn." The gatekeeper regarded him for a long moment. "Knowledge is not given freely. It must be earned. There are tests ahead, trials that will challenge your minds, your bodies, and your very souls. If you fail, you will be lost. Forever." The warning sent a chill through the group. They were far from home, and the path ahead was uncertain at best, deadly at worst. Elon stepped back, glancing at Mia, Ethan, and the others. It was clear that they had crossed into something far greater than they had expected, something that would push them to their limits. This was no longer about exploration. It was about survival. "We're ready," Elon said, his voice firm, though his heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. "We'll take your tests. We're not backing down now." The gatekeeper nodded, a faint glow surrounding its form. "Then you must proceed. But remember, every choice you make here will have consequences. You are no longer visitors. You are part of this world now." With that, the gatekeeper faded into the shimmering surface of the crystal mountain, leaving the team to face the trials ahead. Elon stood motionless, staring at the spot where the gatekeeper had vanished. The air was heavy, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with the weight of what they had just learned. A sense of dread settled over the team, but also an undeniable sense of purpose. There was no turning back now. They had entered this strange realm, and they would need to face whatever it held for them. "We have to do this," Elon said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Whatever it takes." Mia looked up at the towering crystals, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also determination. "I didn't sign up for alien tests, but if this is the way forward, then we have no choice." Ethan glanced around nervously. "I don't like the sound of that. Tests? What does that even mean? And who exactly are we doing this for?" "We're doing this for the future," Elon answered, trying to rally the group. "For answers. For what's out there. If we succeed, we'll have the knowledge we need to move humanity forward, to understand what's beyond our reach." Mia nodded, her expression softening. "And maybe we'll learn something about the rift, about how this world is connected to ours." Elon's eyes narrowed as he studied the terrain around them. The landscape was vast and alien, but there were subtle signs, glowing runes etched into the rock, patterns in the sky, that seemed to point toward a destination. Somewhere, in the distance, there appeared to be a set of stairs carved into the side of a distant mountain. "Let's head toward those stairs," Elon said, pointing. "They might lead us to the first trial." The group set off, the ground soft beneath their feet, and the air filled with an odd, melodic hum. The further they walked, the more surreal the world seemed. Massive floating islands drifted lazily in the sky, defying gravity, while crystal spires shot up from the ground like jagged teeth. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an unmistakable feeling of tension, a sense that something was watching them. As they approached the base of the mountain, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble lightly. Elon froze, signaling the team to stop. He glanced around cautiously, his instincts on high alert. There was something off about this place, something alive. Or maybe it was the watchers the gatekeeper had mentioned. Then, without warning, the ground in front of them cracked open, a deep, rumbling sound echoing through the air. From the depths of the crack, a series of massive, stone-like creatures emerged, their bodies covered in glowing markings similar to those of the gatekeeper. They were humanoid in shape, but much larger, with muscles like ancient boulders and faces devoid of emotion. Their eyes, however, glowed with the same eerie intensity as the gatekeepers. "Get ready," Elon muttered, clenching his fists. "We're about to find out what these trials really mean." One of the creatures stepped forward, its enormous hand raised in a commanding gesture. The air thickened as a voice, deep and resonant, filled the space around them. "The first trial begins now," it boomed. "Prove your strength. Prove your resolve. Only those worthy may ascend." Without warning, the ground beneath them shifted, and the massive stone creature charged toward them, moving at a speed that belied its size. Elon barely had time to react, ducking just as the creature swung its massive fist toward him. The force of the blow cracked the ground, sending a shockwave through the air. "Move!" Elon shouted, scrambling to his feet. Mia and Ethan weren't far behind, dodging to the side as the creature's fist impacted the earth with terrifying force. Elon's mind raced. This wasn't just a test of physical strength. It was a test of quick thinking, teamwork, and survival. They had to act fast or be crushed. Mia darted to the left, her eyes fixed on a glowing crystal embedded in the creature's chest. "There. We need to hit the core." Ethan, still shaky from the close call, nodded. "Right. Aim for the center." Elon charged forward, his adrenaline pumping. The creature swung again, but this time, Elon was ready. He ducked under the swing and rolled to the side, positioning himself near the glowing core. With a swift motion, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device, the same one that had helped them navigate the rift. He aimed it at the glowing crystal and pressed a button. The device hummed to life, sending a pulse of energy into the core. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech as its movements slowed, its massive limbs staggering. Mia and Ethan took advantage of the moment, both of them launching a coordinated attack on the creature's weak points. Mia used a shard of crystal she had found earlier as a makeshift spear, driving it into the back of the creature's leg, while Ethan struck its side with all his might. The stone creature roared in pain, its body cracking under the pressure. With one final thrust, it collapsed to the ground, the glowing crystal at its core shattering into 1,000 pieces. Breathing heavily, Elon approached the fallen creature, examining it closely. The glowing markings that had once covered its body were now fading, as if the creature's life force had been extinguished with the destruction of its core. "Is it over?" Ethan asked, still panting. "I think so," Elon replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "But we're not out of the woods yet. There's probably more where that came from." Mia looked up at the mountain in the distance, the stairs still visible but now surrounded by more of the stone creatures, who seemed to be watching them, waiting. "We won the first battle, but this is only the beginning," Mia said, her voice resolute. "If we want to make it through, we need to be smarter, faster, and ready for anything." Elon nodded. "Let's keep moving." They turned toward the staircase, the path ahead now much clearer. The trials had begun in earnest, and there was no telling what awaited them on the other side. But one thing was certain, they were in this together. And together, they would face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The air was thick with tension as Elon, Mia, and Ethan ascended the ancient, winding staircase that spiraled up the side of the massive mountain. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a reminder of how far they had come, and how much further they still had to go. The distant rumble of the stone creature's collapse had long since faded, but the uneasy feeling lingered. They could sense that the trials were far from over. Elon glanced behind him at the others, their faces pale but determined. Mia walked in the lead, her sharp eyes scanning the path ahead for any signs of danger. Ethan, ever the skeptic, looked up at the strange, floating islands that hovered far above them, the faint glow from the setting sun casting a surreal light on the scene. "This place is so alien," Ethan muttered, shaking his head. "I keep expecting to wake up, like it's all a dream." "I feel that too," Mia said quietly. "But we're not dreaming. This is real, and we have to keep moving." Elon gave them both a reassuring nod. We're in this together. Just remember, the trials are meant to test us. Not just our strength, but our minds, our wills. We're going to face challenges that will push us to our absolute limits. We need to stay focused. The mountain loomed above them, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed faintly in the twilight. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, making each step feel more laborious. Still, they pushed forward, their resolve solidifying with each passing moment. By the time they reached the top, the sun had completely set, and the landscape around them had transformed. The staircase led them to a large, flat plateau, its surface covered in intricate carvings. At the center of the plateau stood a massive stone archway, framed by more of the glowing runes that adorned the mountain. The archway radiated a soft, ethereal light, as if inviting them to step through it. As they approached, the ground beneath their feet shifted once again. This time, the stone beneath them cracked open in multiple places, and from the fissures emerged more of the stone creatures. This time, they were not alone. These new creatures were different. Smaller, yes, but more agile. Their forms were more humanoid, and their eyes glowed with an even brighter intensity than the first creature they had encountered. They stood in a loose formation, their stone limbs flexing and adjusting, as if waiting for something. Elon raised his hand to stop the group. "Something's different this time," Elon said, his voice low. "These creatures, they're not just attacking. They're guarding." Mia stepped forward, her expression calm. "So, what does that mean?" "I think they want us to prove something else," Elon said, narrowing his eyes. "The last trial was about strength, but this one is different." Suddenly, one of the creatures stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on them, and for the first time, it spoke, its voice a low, rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate through the very earth. "Prove your wisdom," it said. "To cross the threshold, you must answer the question that binds this world. Fail, and you will remain here, lost forever." Elon's heart raced. This wasn't what they had expected. There were no weapons, no physical challenges this time. Only a question, a riddle, perhaps, or some test of their understanding. "What question?" Mia asked, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. The creature's eyes glowed even brighter. "The answer you seek lies in the balance of all things. What is the most powerful force in the universe? What drives creation, destruction, and everything in between?" The air felt heavy as the team considered the question. Elon stood still for a moment, his mind racing. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This wasn't a test of might, but a test of intellect. They had to get this right, or they would be trapped in this alien world forever. Mia furrowed her brow. "It's got to be something fundamental, something that affects everything in the universe." Ethan, typically skeptical and reluctant to think too deeply, had a sudden flash of insight. "What if it's change?" he said slowly. "Change is everywhere. It drives progress. It brings things into being and tears them down. Without change, nothing would evolve. Nothing would move forward." Elon turned to Ethan, impressed. "That makes sense. Change is the only thing constant, the force that drives everything in the universe." The creature didn't speak, but the glowing light in its eyes seemed to brighten. Then, without warning, it stepped back and bowed its head, as if acknowledging their answer. The other stone creatures stepped aside, revealing the path forward. The massive stone archway now seemed to beckon them. "You have answered correctly," the first creature said. "Now, cross the threshold." Elon's heart skipped a beat. They had done it. They had passed the second trial, but there was no time to relax. They had come this far, and the journey was far from over. As they passed through the archway, a sudden gust of wind swept over them, and the world around them seemed to shift again. On the other side of the archway, the landscape was nothing like what they had seen before. The ground beneath them was soft and mossy, with lush green forests stretching out in every direction. Strange, glowing plants pulsed with energy, casting an eerie light over the surroundings. The sky overhead was dark, dotted with countless stars, but there was no sign of the strange glowing hues they had seen earlier. "This is beautiful," Mia said, her voice filled with wonder. It feels peaceful. But Elon wasn't so sure. The tranquility of the place felt too perfect, too inviting. It was almost as if it were meant to lull them into a false sense of security. Ethan, always the realist, was more cautious. Something's not right here. Where are the creatures? The trials? They're watching us, Elon said, his voice grim. This place might seem peaceful, but I have a feeling the next trial is already waiting for us. We've just stepped into the eye of the storm. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the faintest sounds of movement echoed through the trees. It was almost as if the world itself was alive, watching them, waiting. The serenity of the forest around them felt almost unnatural. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the ground beneath their feet was soft, like stepping on moss. The trees were tall and twisted, their trunks gleaming with silver-like bark that seemed to shimmer under the light of the twin moons overhead. In the distance, they could hear the faint murmur of a stream, the sound soothing but ominous at the same time. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was too quiet, too perfect. Even the creatures that had challenged them before were nowhere to be seen. The strange creatures they had defeated in the previous trials had disappeared without a trace, leaving only the path forward. "Keep your eyes peeled," Elon said, his voice low, yet firm. "We don't know what's ahead. It's too quiet." Mia nodded, her senses sharp, her eyes darting back and forth. "This place doesn't feel right. It's too peaceful." Ethan, walking at the back of the group, glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I've got a bad feeling about this. There's something about the stillness. It feels like we're walking into a trap." Elon took a deep breath. "Whatever's coming next, we'll face it together. Stay alert, but don't let your guard down." Not yet. The forest was beautiful, but it also felt like a maze, an illusionary trap meant to disorient and confuse. The trees seemed to grow closer together the further they ventured in, their trunks twisting and warping like sentient beings. Each time they looked back, the path they had walked seemed to stretch farther away, as though the forest was rearranging itself to trap them. Mia's eyes narrowed as she gazed into the distance. "There's something off about those trees. Look." Elon followed her gaze. A large, twisted tree stood in the distance, its roots sprawling across the ground like fingers reaching for the earth. Its branches were thick with dark, twisted vines, and its leaves glimmered with an eerie, almost hypnotic light. "Let's move toward it," Elon said, determination in his voice. "It might lead us to the next stage of the trial." As they approached the tree, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the ground beneath their feet became more uneven. The glow from the leaves seemed to flicker as if the tree itself was alive, watching them. Suddenly, without warning, the air around them shifted. The wind picked up, and the leaves rustled violently. The once calm forest now seemed charged with energy, as if someone, was preparing to make its presence known. "I knew it," Ethan muttered. "This place isn't what it seems." Mia raised a hand to her forehead, as if trying to ward off a sudden headache. "I'm feeling dizzy, like the world is spinning around me." Elon's instincts kicked in. "Stay focused. It's an illusion. Don't let it get to you." The ground beneath their feet shook as the twisted tree before them began to shimmer and shift. The bark seemed to ripple, and the roots stretched toward them like giant serpents. In an instant, the tree's silhouette distorted, and before their eyes, it transformed into a giant, shadowy figure, a creature with a humanoid form, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "We have entered the third trial," the creature's voice boomed. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating in their minds. "Your greatest challenge lies ahead. You must face your own fears." Elon stepped forward, his fists clenched. "What do you want from us? We've already fought creatures and answered your riddles. What else do you want?" The creature laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed throughout the forest. "It's not about what I want," it said. "It's about what you fear. The trial is not one of strength or wisdom, but of the mind. You must confront your own darkness, or you will remain lost in this world forever." Mia shuddered, her eyes darting around. "My darkness?" Elon's face hardened. "We can handle this. We've come this far. Whatever we're about to face, we face together. The creature's laughter died down, and the forest seemed to fall silent once again. Then, the air around them shimmered. The world began to bend, and the ground beneath their feet warped, twisting in a dizzying spiral. Suddenly, the world around them changed. They found themselves standing in a stark, unfamiliar landscape. The sky above was a murky gray, and the ground was cracked and barren. In the distance, a massive city stood in ruins, its once glorious towers reduced to crumbled stone and rusted metal. This was a vision of something dark, something terrible. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he looked around. It was a vision, but it was also real, too real. He could feel the heat of the air, smell the burning ruins. A horrible sense of loss filled him. He stepped forward, and the ground beneath his feet cracked with every movement. Elon, Mia's voice trembled from behind him. What is this? What's happening? He turned around, and for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. There, standing at the edge of the ruined city, was a figure. It was himself, only different. His doppelganger was a twisted version of him, wearing a dark, tattered suit, his face scarred, and his eyes filled with the same despair Elon felt deep down but refused to acknowledge. This is your fear, Elon. The creature's voice echoed from all directions. This is what you've always been afraid of, the failure. The ruin of everything you've worked for. Your empire crumbled. Your dreams shattered. Alone in the wreckage. Elon's hands tightened into fists. This is just a trick. A vision. I know who I am. I know what I've done. And I've never been afraid of failure. But the vision of his dark self stepped forward, its voice cold and mocking. You say that now, but deep down, you know you're afraid. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of being nothing. Afraid of being alone. Mia reached out and grabbed Elon's arm. Elon, this isn't real. It's an illusion. Don't let it control you. But the image of Elon's dark self was relentless. You think you're invincible, don't you? That you can control everything. But you can't. You'll lose it all. You'll fail. And you won't be able to save anyone. Elon's mind raced. He had faced his demons before. He had made mistakes, yes, but he had always come out the other side stronger. This vision, this nightmare, was just another trick, another test. No, Elon whispered, his voice steady now. I won't let this define me. This isn't real. The twisted version of himself sneered, but before it could speak again, Elon turned and began to walk away. The vision flickered. The sky seemed to grow brighter, the ruins fading into nothingness. The sound of the creature's mocking voice dissolved as well. Suddenly, Elon found himself back in the forest, with Mia and Ethan standing beside him. The twisted tree creature was gone, and the landscape was once again serene, though far from comforting. You did it, Mia said, her voice filled with awe. You faced it. You faced your fear. Elon exhaled slowly, wiping his brow. It wasn't real. It was just a test. But I had to face it, didn't I? Ethan, still looking shaken, nodded. We all have our demons, but that doesn't mean we're bound by them. Elon turned toward the path ahead. Let's keep going. The trials aren't over yet. They resumed their journey through the eerie forest, now more united than ever. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they could face it together. The forest had faded into the distance, leaving only a thick mist that clung to the ground like a suffocating blanket. The trees, the shimmering leaves, the twisted roots, they had all vanished, as though they were mere illusions themselves. Now, Elon, Mia, and Ethan found themselves standing at the edge of a vast, yawning abyss. The ground before them cracked open into a dark chasm that stretched far beyond their sight, its depths seemingly endless. The mist was thick here, swirling like smoke, and the air was heavy with a strange, oppressive energy. The sky above had turned a deep shade of crimson, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Elon felt an unease gnawing at the back of his mind, a feeling that this place, this abyss, held the key to something far more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. A low rumbling echoed from the depths below, as if something ancient and powerful stirred in the dark. This is it, isn't it? Mia said, her voice quiet, almost fearful. "This is the next trial?" Elon nodded, stepping forward cautiously. "We're about to face something that none of us are prepared for. This is the trial of truth. And in this place, truth is more dangerous than any weapon." Ethan, usually the first to crack a joke to lighten the mood, was uncharacteristically silent. He stood beside Elon, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously around the abyss. "What do you mean by truth? What are we supposed to face here?" Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down into the abyss, his gaze drawn to the swirling mist below. He felt it, a presence, like a weight pressing down on him, a force that could unravel everything. "I think we'll each have to face our own truth," Elon said slowly. "Something we've been hiding from. A truth that, once revealed, could change everything." A voice, soft but unmistakable, drifted on the wind, sending a chill down their spines. "Step forward, Elon Musk," the voice said. It was not a voice they could place, neither human nor machine, but something older, wiser. "You, who have sought to bend the laws of nature, to control destiny itself, must now face your own." Elon's heart thudded in his chest. "I'm not afraid," he said firmly, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Mia stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the edge of the chasm. "What do you mean, face your truth? What's down there?" The ground beneath their feet trembled as the mist swirled faster, swirling upward like a vortex. The voice continued, now addressing all three of them. "Your deepest fears, your darkest secrets, the lies you tell yourself and others, these will be revealed here. The truth cannot be escaped. Step forward, or be consumed by your own deceit." Without warning, a path appeared before them, an ethereal, glowing bridge that stretched over the abyss, disappearing into the mists beyond. The voice had fallen silent. Mia looked at Elon, her expression hard. "We don't have a choice. We need to cross." Elon hesitated, glancing at Ethan. The air was thick with uncertainty, but he knew they had no other option. The abyss seemed to call to him, an unspoken challenge that he couldn't ignore. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the bridge, feeling the cold energy of the abyss beneath him. Mia followed closely behind, and Ethan brought up the rear. The bridge was narrow, barely wide enough for their feet, but it seemed to hold firm beneath their weight. The further they walked, the more the air grew charged. The mist became denser, wrapping around them like tendrils of smoke, and the temperature dropped, making each breath feel like a struggle. Elon's mind raced, trying to anticipate what was coming, but the truth of the trial was elusive. Suddenly, the mist ahead parted, and the scene before them shifted. Elon found himself standing in the middle of his childhood home, the familiar room suddenly bathed in the soft golden light of memories. He was a child again, no older than 10, and there, sitting at the kitchen table, was his father. The room felt too real, too alive. It was as if Elon had stepped back in time. "Elon," his father said, his voice a deep, familiar rumble. "Why are you always trying to escape from who you are? You'll never be what you want to be if you keep running from your past." Elon froze. The weight of those words hit him like a physical blow. His father's voice was both comforting and devastating, reminding him of everything he had left behind to chase his dreams, to build his empire. But was it worth it? Was all the ambition worth the distance he had put between himself and the people who cared about him? Before Elon could speak, the scene shifted again, and the room around him began to melt away like smoke in the wind. The floor beneath his feet cracked, and in an instant, the vision vanished. Now, he stood in a stark, empty void, a blackness that stretched to infinity. In front of him stood a massive figure, a shadowy version of himself. The figure wore the same suit Elon had worn for years, but there was something wrong with it. The suit was torn, the fabric shredded, the man beneath it gaunt and hollow-eyed. The figure spoke, its voice cold and detached. "You failed them, Elon. Your vision, the one you worked so hard for, came at the cost of everything. You became so obsessed with progress, with reaching the stars, that you lost sight of what truly matters. Family, love, connection, the very things that make you human." Elon took a step back, but the figure advanced toward him, its face a mirror of his own, twisted by doubt and regret. You built your empire, but at what cost? How many people did you leave behind? How many relationships did you sacrifice for the sake of a future that you can't even touch? You'll never be enough. The figure's voice echoed in Elon's mind, reverberating through his skull, its words seeping into every corner of his thoughts.
No.
Elon whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't leave them behind. Didn't you? The figure sneered. The people who truly mattered. The ones who needed you. You thought you could fix everything with money and technology. But now, look around you. What do you have? Nothing. Elon shook his head, trying to block out the figure's words, but they were like chains, holding him in place. The darkness around him grew colder, and he felt his very essence begin to fray at the edges. Stop it, he said, his voice firmer now. You're not real. This is not the truth. The figure grinned, its eyes gleaming with malice. But it is. You cannot escape it. Mia's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and clear. Elon. He turned to see her and Ethan standing at the edge of the abyss, their eyes filled with concern. The figure began to fade as the scene around them shifted again, this time into a clearer, lighter space. The mist lifted, and the darkness started to recede. Mia stepped forward, her gaze locked on Elon. You don't have to face this alone. We're here with you. Whatever this is, whatever this trial is, don't let it control you. Ethan added, his voice steady but earnest. You're not your failures, Elon. You're more than this. We all are. The figure dissipated into smoke, and the abyss beneath them began to fade as well. The bridge solidified beneath their feet, and the mists cleared, revealing a new landscape stretching before them. Elon felt the weight in his chest lighten. He had faced the darkness, the self-doubt and regret, and come out the other side stronger. The trial of truth was over. They had all faced it, and together, they had emerged. As they stepped off the bridge and onto solid ground, Elon turned to Mia and Ethan. Thank you, he said quietly. I couldn't have done it without you. Mia smiled. You don't need to thank us. You've always had the strength to face your own truth. You just had to believe it. Elon nodded, a sense of resolve settling in his chest. He had passed yet another trial, but the road ahead still held mysteries. We're not done yet, he said, turning his gaze toward the horizon. Let's keep moving. Whatever lies ahead, we'll face it together. The landscape before them shifted again, the mist clearing to reveal a grand structure rising out of the ground, a massive, gleaming tower that stretched toward the sky like a beacon. It was unlike anything Elon had ever seen before, a mix of ancient architecture and futuristic design, with smooth glass walls that seemed to pulse with a light of their own. This is it, Elon murmured, his voice low and filled with awe. The Tower of Decisions. Mia and Ethan exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what exactly Elon meant, but both could feel the weight of the moment. There was something foreboding about the tower, as if it held more than just physical challenges. It represented something deeper, a choice that would test everything they believed in. They stepped toward the tower, and the ground beneath their feet felt solid but strangely alive, as though it too were part of some greater entity. The air was filled with a low hum, a frequency that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. It was a sound that didn't come from the world around them, but from within them. A subtle reminder that this journey was not just external. It was one of the mind, the soul, and now, perhaps even their very humanity. As they approached the entrance, a soft voice echoed from the tower, almost as if it had been waiting for them. Elon Musk, Mia, and Ethan, welcome to the Tower of Decisions. You stand at the crossroads of your greatest choices. Only by choosing the path that aligns with your deepest values will you be allowed to pass. Mia looked at Elon, her brow furrowed in confusion. What does that mean? What kind of choice are we talking about? The choices we make define us, Elon replied, his voice distant. He knew exactly what this was, the test of values. This tower isn't just about us. It's about the future of humanity. Every decision, every step, has led us here. And now, we must face it. The question isn't just what we want, but what we're willing to sacrifice for what we believe in. The door to the tower opened with a quiet click, revealing an expansive, minimalist hall. The walls were smooth and reflective, as though made of polished metal. There was no obvious pathway, no clear direction, just an expanse that seemed to stretch on forever. A figure appeared in the center of the room, a woman, tall and regal, dressed in white robes. Her features were sharp and striking, and her eyes seemed to look through them rather than at them. She emanated an aura of calm, but held an undeniable authority. "I am the guardian of decisions," she said, her voice echoing softly in the stillness. "In this place, you will face the ultimate question. Each of you must decide who you will become, not just as individuals, but as a collective force. Choose wisely, for this decision will reverberate through the future." Elon stepped forward, instinctively taking the lead. He had always been the one to shoulder the responsibility. He knew that this trial, this decision, was likely the most crucial they had faced so far. "What are the choices?" Elon asked, his voice calm but his mind racing. The Guardian raised her hand, and 3 paths materialized in the air before them. Each one glowed with a different hue: blue, red, and gold. "The paths represent the future," the Guardian explained. "The blue path is one of reason and science, a future built on logic, innovation, and the cold, unwavering truth of progress. The red path is one of passion and emotion, a future built on human connection, creativity, and the warmth of collective heart. The gold path is one of balance, a future that seeks to unite the two: rational thought and emotional wisdom, technology and humanity." Elon studied the paths. He knew the weight of each choice. The blue path was what he had always pursued: the future of technology, of Mars, of human expansion beyond the confines of Earth. The red path, on the other hand, felt foreign, but there was something deeply human about it. The connection between people, the way passion and love could fuel progress in ways that machines never could. And the gold path, the idea of balance, was the most elusive, the hardest to grasp, yet it felt like the answer was somewhere in between. Mia spoke first, her voice steady. "What happens if we choose one path over another? What's at stake?" "The stakes are everything," the Guardian replied, her tone unyielding. "Each path will shape your future and the future of humanity. Choose the blue path, and you may build a world of technological marvels, machines that think, space colonies that thrive, but you may lose the heart of what it means to be human. Choose the red path, and you will create a world of connection and empathy, but you may forego progress in areas that could save your species. The gold path. The gold path asks you to walk the tightrope between both, an uncharted territory where the two worlds must coexist in harmony. But be warned, it is the hardest path, and few have the strength to walk it." Ethan, who had remained quiet for most of the conversation, stepped forward now, his voice laced with uncertainty. "What if the choice isn't clear? What if none of these paths are the right one?" Elon turned to look at his friend, his expression grave. "That's the dilemma we're facing. This is the moment where we must decide not just what's best for us, but for everyone, for the world that we leave behind, and the one we strive to build." Mia nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the 3 paths. She took a deep breath, almost as if steeling herself for the decision. "This isn't just about us. It's about what we want the world to become." The Guardian watched them silently, her expression unreadable. She had posed the question, but now it was up to them to answer. Elon felt the weight of the decision pressing on him, each path pulling at him like a magnet. He had spent his life chasing innovation, the belief that science and technology could solve the world's problems. But could he ignore the cost of that pursuit? Could he continue to build a future on the backs of people who had been left behind in the name of progress? Mia's voice broke the silence. "Maybe it's not about choosing just one. Maybe it's about finding a way to weave them together. Like a thread in a tapestry, each one essential to the design." Elon's eyes narrowed as he looked at the glowing paths before them. The answer was there, hidden in plain sight. It wasn't about choosing between science and humanity. It was about uniting them, embracing the very thing that he had long struggled to balance: rational progress and emotional connection. "Gold," he said finally. "We choose gold." The Guardian's eyes flickered with approval, though she remained silent. Mia smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. The hardest path, but the only one that makes sense. Ethan nodded, stepping closer to Elon. Let's do it then. Together. As they moved toward the glowing gold path, the air seemed to shift around them. The hum grew louder, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated with a strange energy. The Guardian stepped aside, allowing them to pass, her eyes following them with an inscrutable gaze. The path stretched before them, bathed in golden light. It wasn't just a path. It was a promise, a future yet to be shaped, a future they would create together. The Tower of Decisions was behind them, but the real journey had only just begun. The golden path stretched before them, gleaming in the soft, surreal light that filled the space. It was as if the very air around them had become charged, like the moment before a storm breaks, pregnant with possibility and tension. Elon, Mia, and Ethan stood at the beginning of it, uncertain of what the journey would entail, but each knowing, in some deep and quiet part of themselves, that this was the right choice. The gold path wasn't just about finding balance. It was about creating something new, something never before attempted. As they took their first steps, the ground beneath them seemed to shift, becoming softer, as if the path was responding to their very presence. The air smelled faintly of ozone, a reminder of the technology that had led them here. But there was also an underlying sweetness, as though the earth itself was breathing in sync with their movements. They were no longer in the Tower of Decisions. They were now in a space of transformation, an environment that reflected their collective aspirations. Mia was the first to speak. Her voice was a whisper at first, almost as if she were afraid to break the silence. This feels different. It's like we're in between two worlds. Ethan looked over at her, his face filled with wonder. That's exactly it. This path, it's not just about technology or emotion. It's about something in between, a space where both can thrive together. Elon walked ahead of them, his gaze fixed on the path. The journey felt heavier now, as if each step they took was shaping the world that would follow. He had always believed that technology was the key to the future, but now, more than ever, he felt the weight of what it meant to bring humanity into that future without losing its soul. Balance, Elon muttered to himself. We've been looking for this for so long, but I never thought it would be so hard. Mia caught up to him, her expression thoughtful. Is that what's been driving you all these years, Elon? The search for balance? Between what's possible and what's ethical? Elon looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. In a way, yes. I've always believed in the power of innovation to solve problems. But the more I've learned, the more I've realized that progress can't come at the expense of humanity. We've made that mistake too many times. Ethan, who had been walking slightly ahead, turned back to join them. It's not just about creating something new. It's about making sure we don't forget what makes us human in the process. We can build the future, but we have to remember who we are when we do it. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The golden path twisted and turned, leading them through a landscape that seemed to be shifting with every step they took. The trees around them were tall and slender, their trunks gleaming silver, with leaves that shimmered like mirrors in the light. The sky above them was a deep, almost otherworldly purple, dotted with stars that seemed too close, as though they were within arm's reach. They came upon a clearing, where a large, crystalline structure stood in the center. It looked like a massive, intricate sculpture, its surfaces gleaming and translucent, refracting light in every direction. At the center of the structure was a pool of water, still and calm, reflecting the beauty of the landscape. Elon, Mia, Ethan. A voice echoed from the crystal, deep and resonant. It wasn't a voice they could hear with their ears, but one they felt within them, vibrating through their very being. The voice was familiar, yet it was not. It was the voice of something older, wiser. You have chosen the path of balance. The next challenge is to understand what balance truly means. You must look within yourselves and face the hardest questions. A figure materialized in front of them, tall and composed, yet with an aura of deep tranquility. It was a woman, but not in the traditional sense. She was more like an embodiment of the path itself, radiating a presence that was both comforting and intimidating. "I am the keeper of balance," the figure said, her voice like a melody. "You have chosen the hardest path, and it will test you. This challenge is not one of strength or intellect, but of soul." Mia took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the figure. "What does that mean? What are we supposed to do?" The keeper smiled gently. "You must each confront the greatest paradox within yourselves. For balance can only be achieved when you are whole, when you accept both your strengths and your weaknesses, your desires and your fears. The future you seek can only be built when you have reconciled these opposites within you." Ethan's brows furrowed in confusion. "That sounds complicated. How do we do that?" The keeper's eyes softened. "It's simple, but not easy. The path of balance demands that you acknowledge your own inner conflict. The choices you've made have brought you to this point, but the decisions ahead will require more than intellect. You must learn to trust your heart as much as your mind, your intuition as much as your reasoning." Elon felt a tightness in his chest, as though something deep within him had been awakened, something he had buried for years. The weight of his choices, the millions of decisions, both big and small, that had led him here, pressed down on him. He had always thought of himself as someone who lived in the world of logic and science, but this path, this journey, was asking for more. It was asking him to reconcile the parts of himself he had long ignored. "I've spent my whole life trying to solve problems with logic and reason," Elon said, his voice quieter now. "But I've never really looked at the emotional side of things. I've been so focused on the future, I never stopped to think about how that future affects the people around me, how it affects me." The keeper nodded, as though she had expected this. "The future you build must be for all people, not just the ones you can see. To truly lead, you must understand the weight of your decisions on the hearts and minds of others. Balance does not mean equality in every moment, but a recognition that all things must be considered." Mia stepped forward, her eyes wide. "I think I understand. It's not just about what's best for one person, but what's best for everyone, even if that means making hard sacrifices." The keeper's smile deepened. "Exactly. And now, you must make the choice again, this time within yourselves. You will each face a trial that will force you to confront your own internal struggles. The question is not what you choose, but how you choose to reconcile the parts of you that seem at odds." The air grew heavier, and the shimmering light around them began to pulse, as if the very landscape itself was holding its breath. Elon, Mia, and Ethan stood before the keeper, knowing that the moment had come. Their trial had begun, not in the form of external forces, but within themselves. Each of them would have to face their own contradictions, their own weaknesses, and their own truths. The future they sought to build was waiting, but first, they would have to become whole. The world around them shifted again, the golden light from the path fading into a deep, warm glow. Elon, Mia, and Ethan stood still, the weight of the keeper's words settling over them like a blanket. Their journey had taken many twists and turns, but none had felt as personal as this one. This was the moment they would face not just the future of humanity, but their own inner truths. The keeper of balance stood before them, watching intently, her expression serene. "You must each face your trial," she said softly. "The trial of self-reconciliation. It will test the core of who you are, and in doing so, it will reveal the future you are capable of building. The path you choose now will define your destiny." Elon took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had always prided himself on being logical, on using his mind to solve problems. But this was different. This was not a puzzle that could be solved with facts or calculations. It was a reckoning, one that would demand more from him than just his intellect. It would ask him to face the parts of himself he had long tried to ignore. "Each of you will face a vision," the keeper continued, her voice a soft, soothing cadence. "You will be transported into a place where your deepest contradictions lie. The challenge is not to choose the easy path, but to embrace the difficult truths about yourself. Only then will you find balance." Before Elon could respond, the world around them dissolved into a shimmering mist. His surroundings blurred, then sharpened, and suddenly, he found himself standing in a vast, empty space, alone. There were no trees, no buildings, only a sky that stretched infinitely in every direction, a sky filled with swirling clouds that mirrored the turbulence inside his mind. He knew immediately what this place was. It was a reflection of himself. As if on cue, a figure appeared before him, a mirror image, but not one he recognized. It was a younger version of himself, dressed in the same casual attire, but with a look of anger and disillusionment on his face. The younger Elon's eyes were sharp, filled with bitterness, as though he were confronting the older version with all the disappointments and regrets he had long buried. "You've spent your entire life chasing after something," the younger version said, his voice filled with a harshness that Elon had long forgotten. "A dream of Mars, of technology, of a future where you could escape everything here. But what have you sacrificed? What have you lost along the way?" Elon felt a pang of guilt wash over him. He had always been driven by the vision of a better future, but in doing so, he had lost touch with so much of the world around him. Friends, family, moments that mattered. And for what? For progress? For innovation? Was it worth it? The younger Elon stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the older man. "You've been so obsessed with changing the world, you forgot to live in it. What good is saving humanity if you've sacrificed your own soul in the process?" Elon's heart raced as the weight of the younger version's words struck him like a blow. The pain he had tried so hard to bury, his strained relationships, his missed opportunities to be present, flooded back to the surface. He had always put the future first, but what about the present? What about the people he loved? What about himself? The younger Elon's figure morphed, shifting into another version of himself. This one older, grayer, more weary, but with a look of sadness rather than anger. "You think you can fix everything," the new version said, his voice low. "But you can't even fix yourself. You've built rockets to escape this planet, but have you ever stopped to wonder if you've already abandoned the people you're trying to save?" Elon staggered back, the truth hitting him like a tidal wave. His relentless pursuit of progress had come at the cost of the most important things in life. His work had consumed him. His dreams of a future beyond Earth had driven a wedge between him and everything that made him human. "Why didn't you see it?" the older version whispered. "Why did you think you could be both the savior and the sacrifice?" Elon's chest tightened as he struggled to find the words to respond. He had always believed that his work, his vision for the future, was the answer to humanity's survival. But now, standing before the reflection of his own failures, he was starting to question everything. Was his vision of the future worth it if the present was falling apart? "You need to make a choice," the older version said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "The path of balance requires that you accept both sides of yourself, the dreamer and the realist, the innovator and the human. You can't keep running from your contradictions. They will define you, whether you face them or not." Elon closed his eyes, his breath shaky. He had always thought that the future was about solving problems. But now, he realized, the future wasn't just about technology, it was about humanity. It was about accepting the parts of himself he had kept buried and reconciling them with the vision he had built. With a deep breath, Elon opened his eyes, the image of his younger self dissolving into the mist. The landscape around him began to shift, slowly turning into a more familiar space, his laboratory. But it wasn't just any lab. This one was filled with people, friends, family, colleagues, those he had neglected in his single-minded pursuit of the future. Mia's voice cut through the silence. "Elon, it's time to wake up." He looked around, but the room was empty. There was no sign of her or Ethan. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then, the keeper's words returned to him, the trial of self-reconciliation. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was clear now. He didn't just need to find balance in the world. He needed to find it within himself. Mia's vision came to life in the same way. She found herself alone in a space that seemed to stretch endlessly, like a void that reflected the space within her own heart. Her mind swirled with doubts and memories of the choices she had made in her life. Before her appeared a figure, someone she recognized, but not quite. It was herself, only in a future she had never imagined. The older version of Mia was more confident, more certain. but there was an air of regret in her eyes. "You've always had the answers, haven't you?" the future Mia asked, her voice soft but cutting. "But have you ever asked yourself what it costs to always be the one who knows what to do?" Mia felt a lump form in her throat as the words echoed in her mind. She had always taken charge, always pushed forward, but what had she sacrificed in the process? Had she ever truly listened to others? Had she been so focused on being the solution that she forgot to allow space for vulnerability? Balance isn't just about intellect, the future Mia continued. It's about empathy, too. You've always relied on your mind, but what about your heart? What about your connection with others? Mia closed her eyes, the weight of the question heavy on her soul. She had always thought that being the strong one meant being the one with all the answers, but now, she wasn't so sure. The world around Elon began to settle into something more tangible, more grounded. The shifting landscape of swirling mists gave way to a familiar, but somehow transformed, version of his workshop. A space that should have felt comforting, but now felt like an open wound, exposing all the scars he had long forgotten. The hum of machines, the glow of blueprints on the wall, the sharp scent of metal and oil, all of it was still here. But it was different, not because the room had changed, but because he had changed. Standing in the center of this space, Elon felt like a stranger. The trial he had just undergone, the vision of himself from his younger and older days, had stripped him down to the bone. It was not a vision of who he had been, but a mirror showing him the price of his single-minded pursuit of greatness. "Balance," he whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. He realized the path he had been following had been about doing, creating, reaching for the stars without stopping to ask if the cost was too great. He had been so focused on the destination that he had forgotten to live the journey. But now, here, in the echo of his own reflection, he was left with the question. What was enough? His gaze fell upon a familiar face. Mia. She had been with him throughout this journey, but in this moment, he saw her differently. She, too, had gone through her trial. He could tell by the way she looked at him, her expression softer, as if she had made a revelation of her own. Mia stepped toward him, her eyes thoughtful. "Did you see it too?" Elon nodded, the weight of his inner journey still heavy on his chest. "I saw who I could have been, and who I am. The question is, can I change?" Mia smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both empathy and strength. "You already are changing. We both are. This path isn't about perfection, Elon. It's about knowing when to stop and listen. It's about realizing that balance isn't something you find at the end of the road. It's something you build along the way." Elon let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Her words cut through the fog in his mind like a beacon, giving him clarity. For years, he had believed that to create a better world, he had to sacrifice everything that made life meaningful. But now, he understood. The balance wasn't about achieving more, but about understanding when to give, when to take, and when to simply be. Mia's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's not just about innovation, Elon. It's about connection, about people, about being present." The realization hit him hard. All of his grand visions, all of his dreams for Mars, for the future, they had been driven by an instinct to save humanity. But what good was that if he couldn't save himself in the process? He had spent years obsessed with creating something for the future, but in the process, he had neglected the very people he cared about in the present. The balance wasn't just in the work. It was in his relationships, his connections with others, his ability to empathize and to love. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in the corner, observing the two of them. His trial had been different, less about confronting his past, and more about his future. He had always been the observer, the one who watched, analyzed, and offered guidance. But in this moment, he realized that his role had changed. The trial had shown him something important. The key to balance lay not in simply solving problems, but in helping others find their way. He joined them, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "We all have pieces of the puzzle, but until we work together, the picture can't be complete. Each of us brings something different to the table. Elon, your vision for the future is invaluable, but it has to be grounded in the reality of the present. Mia, your intellect and leadership are unmatched, but it's your ability to understand people that will make the future work." Elon looked at Ethan, his eyes narrowing in thought. I've always thought I had to do it all. But now, I see. It's not about carrying the weight alone. It's about knowing when to share it. Mia nodded, her gaze steady. Exactly. We can't build the future if we aren't balanced within ourselves first. The power to innovate and create is important, but so is the ability to connect, to understand the human side of progress. For a long moment, they stood in silence, each lost in the weight of their own thoughts. The keeper's voice echoed in their minds. True balance comes from within. Only by understanding yourselves can you help the world around you. The air around them seemed to grow thicker with the gravity of their conversation. Each of them, in their own way, had struggled with the tension between their dreams and their reality, between their ambition and their humanity. The future they wanted to build could not be done alone. It required collaboration, understanding, and the humility to listen to others. But the hardest part, Elon realized, was the willingness to admit that they didn't have all the answers. Not even he, the visionary who had been heralded as a leader of the future, had all the answers. And that, in itself, was a kind of freedom. A freedom that came from accepting the uncertainty of the journey and the necessity of others. Mia placed a hand on Elon's shoulder, breaking the silence between them. We've learned a lot, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Now, it's time to put it into practice. The world won't wait for us to figure it out, but we can start by being the example. Elon smiled, a small, genuine smile that felt unfamiliar but comforting. I think you're right. Balance isn't just a goal. It's the foundation for everything else. If we can't find it within ourselves, how can we hope to build it in the world? Ethan, always the pragmatist, added, it's not enough to talk about it. We have to live it. Every day. In every decision. Elon looked around at both of them, his friends, his partners in this journey. He realized something fundamental. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more decisions to make, more challenges to face, more sacrifices. But now, more than ever, he felt ready for it. They had all faced the darkness within themselves, and in doing so, they had uncovered the true power of balance. It was not the absence of struggle or conflict. It was the ability to move forward, to grow, to adapt, and to love, all at once. The air was different now, crisper, more alive, as if the universe itself had shifted in subtle ways, reflecting the profound transformations that had occurred within Elon, Mia, and Ethan. The trials they had faced, the revelations they had uncovered, and the struggles they had endured were now behind them, but their journey was far from over. The keeper's words lingered in their minds, a steady pulse of guidance. True balance comes from within. Only by understanding yourselves can you help the world around you. They stood together at the precipice of what could be humanity's greatest evolution. The path ahead stretched out before them, vast and undefined, but for the first time, they were no longer afraid. They had faced their personal battles, acknowledged their flaws, and discovered that the power to create a better world lay not in perfection, but in their willingness to evolve together. As they looked out over the horizon, a quiet sense of clarity settled over them. They had learned to embrace the paradoxes within themselves, the desire to innovate, to dream, and to lead, while also acknowledging the need for human connection, empathy, and self-care. They no longer saw the future as a place to escape to, but as something to nurture, together, here and now. Elon turned to Mia and Ethan, a calm understanding in his eyes. We're ready, he said, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of purpose. The journey we've just been on, it's only the beginning. We've unlocked something deeper than any breakthrough technology or ambitious mission. We've unlocked the power of balance. Mia smiled, her eyes soft with recognition. It's not about building the perfect world. It's about building one that works, one that includes everyone. No one can do it alone. And the future won't wait for us to figure it out perfectly. But as long as we walk this path with each other, there's nothing we can't achieve. Ethan, ever the realist, nodded in agreement. The world isn't going to change in one day, but it's going to change. And it will start with us, our choices, our actions. The balance we create, here and now, will ripple out and touch everything we do. The trio shared a moment of quiet reflection, each of them understanding the magnitude of what lay ahead. But there was no fear, no uncertainty, only resolve. They had learned to trust the process, to accept their imperfections, and to see each other not as leaders or followers, but as partners. And in that partnership, they had found something greater than themselves, the potential to change the world. As they began to walk forward, a new dawn was breaking over the horizon. The world they had envisioned, the one filled with innovation, connection, and hope, was no longer a distant dream. It was something they could touch, something they could build, together. The years passed, and the changes the trio set in motion began to unfold. Elon's vision for the future, of interplanetary exploration, sustainable energy, and revolutionary technology, became more grounded in reality. But his new understanding of balance shaped everything he did. His projects were no longer driven solely by the desire to push humanity forward, but by the recognition that progress must be made with care, consideration, and compassion. Mia's leadership continued to inspire, but her approach had evolved. She was no longer just the brilliant mind at the front of a movement. She had become the heart of it, listening, learning, and creating spaces where collaboration and empathy thrived. She showed the world that intellect and emotion weren't opposites. They were necessary partners in the creation of a better future. Ethan, with his analytical mind and pragmatic approach, helped bring the trio's vision to life. He worked behind the scenes, connecting people, resources, and ideas in ways that made the impossible seem achievable. His role in the journey wasn't one of spotlight, but of quiet influence, ensuring that everything they did was both innovative and sustainable. Together, they created not just a future, but a world where technology and humanity coexisted in harmony. The balance they had found within themselves, between ambition and empathy, progress and preservation, the individual and the collective, became the foundation for everything that followed. And as they looked back on their journey, they realized that the greatest discovery wasn't the technology they built or the dreams they chased. It was the realization that the true power to change the world lies not in what we build, but in how we choose to live, with each other, with empathy, with understanding, and with love. The future was no longer a place to escape to. It was a world to create, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?